It's my pleasure today to introduce Alec Gilbert, who's the CEO of the Adelaide Convention Centre. And many of you might remember when we met about 3 or 4 years ago over on the Western Stand, Alec spoke about a vision of what he saw happening with the Convention Centre. And quietly since then, and many of you would notice that there's been some building work going on along with other building work, but slipping underneath the radar with not a lot of controversy has been the building of the Convention Centre. And the final stage, which is being built now, is at the eastern end, and that required the demolition of the original Convention Centre that was built in 1987. Alec hasn't gone terribly grey. I'm a bit concerned about that because there's been lots of trials and tribulations of this project, but please welcome Alec, who's going to talk to you about what he's actually seeing his vision come to fruition, and it's the Convention Centre, a symbol of the future. Please welcome Alec Gilbert.
Thanks very much, Geoffrey, and thank you for the invitation to address you all. I've called it Adelaide Convention Centre a symbol for the future. As I talk to you, I hope you realise why I see it as a symbol of the future for South Australia. Now, you might wonder why a government in South Australia would spend $400 million on a convention centre. When you think about it, South Australia is 1 million square kilometres in area. Its population is 1.5 million. It's the same size as Egypt, that has 70 million population. It's twice the size of France, that has 50 million. And it's 5 times the size of the UK, which has 60 million. It's got the lowest GDP of all the states on the mainland, and it only has 7% of the population. It does have 70% of the wine, but there aren't that many wine conferences around that we could justify that kind of money. If I do my maths correctly, if you take an assumption there's about 1.2 people living in Adelaide, 1.2 million people living in Adelaide, then that means you've probably got about 3 persons per square kilometre in the rest of the state, which is not much of a hinterland to draw on for your conferences. So really, Adelaide Convention Centre is entirely reliant on drawing events from outside the state and internationally. And of course, that's the reason it was built. Our problem is that there's new competition cropping up everywhere, particularly in Asia, but just look around Australia. Every single big city has a major convention centre. Sydney's just closed for 3 years, building a new one. Brisbane's just extended. Gold Coast is about to extend. Canberra's about to build a new one. So the competition is fierce. We were the smallest and we were the first purpose-built convention centre in Australia, so we were the oldest. The design of the original building had real problems in terms of accessibility, and we were actually losing events. Larger events were not coming to us anymore, and in fact there was a reluctance to use the old building. So we had to change. Now, why would a government again invest in the business events sector? Well, first of all, it's the highest yielding sector of the tourism economy. International delegates spend about 6 times the amount of the average tourist and about $630 per day. And over a trip, they probably spend about 1.5 times more than your average tourist. And it's a sizable economy. The value of the business events sector in South Australia alone is about $1.7 billion. So it is worth protecting. In addition, it's durable. You don't get affected by things like the GFC. In fact, when the GFC was in its heyday, our business was as usual and we almost hit record revenues. It can help iron out the peaks and troughs, and it does induce tourism. People who have a good time, they will come back as a tourist, they'll add pre and post tours, and 20% will bring accompanying persons. But perhaps more than that is the fact that governments are now starting to realise that while convention centres and convention delegates contribute to the visitor economy, They are now actually, probably more importantly, contributing to the business economy. And they are the point where changes happen, where you gather world leaders, world thought leaders to come and discuss particular items at conferences. In fact, right now, they're discussing the whole question of the nuclear future at the Convention Centre, the future of South Australia. And just in the last 2 weeks, we've been reading the papers. We've had 2 medical events in-house. One was gastroenterology, major announcements made about treatment of bowel cancer. The other was the Australian, let's get the name of that one right a moment, the Australian Down Under Sleep Conference, which was actually talking about cures for snoring, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who would be very interested in that one here. Of course, in September, we also hosted the Land Forces Conference, a massive conference, occupied every single square centimetre that we had in the centre. 11,000 odd visitors over the 3 days, a critical part of the SA economy, 22 heads of army from around the world, something like 23 countries represented, all converging on Adelaide, and all of Adelaide's industry involved in defence, involved in instrumentation, all represented there, connecting with the world leaders. That's really what the business event sector is about. Then, of course, it's just what you do when we're buying over a year, what we're drawing out of the local economy. And take food and beverage. I'm not going to go through all the stats there, but imagine if we'd closed down for 3 years like Sydney did. We purposely didn't because of the impact it would have on the economy and the fact it would be very hard to reposition Adelaide as a convention destination after closing down for 3 years. But just an interesting one there, the 2.3 tonnes of prawns, we actually calculated if we laid them head to head, they would stretch for 11.5 kilometres. That's the kind of useful information you learn at conferences. In March 2010, the government actually saw merit in what we were advocating, saw merit in the fact that the economy needed to change direction, and saw merit in all the reasons that I've just advanced about the importance of the business events sector. As soon as they announced the fact that the money was available for both stages of the redevelopment, we became a gold sponsor of a study called Conventions 2020. And that was a worldwide study of the conference industry and what was going to happen. And what they said was that meetings are here to stay. In fact, the virtual environment was not going to be a threat to the industry, it was actually going to, in fact, aid the industry. Networking would be the chief reason why people would go to conferences. It's to meet those connections and make those connections. And the design of convention centres as a result has changed completely. And when you go through our new centre, you would see that as you walk through the corridors and the lobbies. And you need to change, obviously, to adapt to technology. The increase in Wi-Fi has just been extraordinary. We thought we were up with it. We've got a capability of 12,000 connections within the centre. Already we're outgrowing it. It's just going leaps and bounds. And finally, centres have to be very, very flexible. We also looked at the meetings industry. The good news was the meetings industry the number of meetings is doubling every 10 years internationally. The bad news is the size of the meetings is dropping. And therefore, again, in terms of the way we designed our convention centre, we had to take those trends into account. The other interesting thing is that 98.5% of all conferences held worldwide are under 1,000 people. So the preoccupation of going bigger and better just does not make economic sense, especially for a city like Adelaide. So our brief, as far as the convention centre went, to the architects and to the consultant team, was it had to be iconic but South Australian. It had to respect the architecture and the scale of the surrounding buildings, and I'm sure when you come out of the Oval here and look across the river, you'll see it with the Festival Centre and Samri as the bookends and what the convention centre is like in between. It needs to operate as 3 distinct entities, but cater for those big ones and operate as one big building. And that's so that we can target those under 1,000 conferences. It needs to be obviously reflect operator requirements, and it has to be flexible. I won't go into the rest. So what we do is sorry, I've gone the wrong way. So we had this 2-stage development. Stage 1, which is now complete, really was about replacing the original building when we knocked that down, because we had bookings way ahead and we had to accommodate those bookings. Stage 2, it's only on the completion of Stage 2 that we actually create the additional area. So Stage 1 opened in 2015, and I've got to say it's been highly, highly successful. I know from an architectural point of view there'll be critics, and there will also be people who love the building. But there you can see the South Australian iconic and how it matches the Flinders Range. What you also have to remember that basically it's a rectangular shed capable of being subdivided in many, many different configurations. It is also Adelaide's longest suspension bridge, because it's actually built over the railway lines, so it actually has been designed as a bridge rather than just a building. So that's obviously given lots of design limitations and challenges. If we just look inside the main hall, you can see the main plenary seating. The main plenary seating raking down and flat floor. That seating can be moved around. It can change direction. We can put it this way, creating smaller meeting rooms. We have doors at the upper level here to facilitate rear access to the upper levels. All this lighting grid here can be lowered down to the floor. It can be set in different angles and configurations, and the hall itself can be divided into about 6 different configurations. Flexibility, the key to the whole design. Upstairs, I'm sure many of you have been to the panorama, what we call the panorama ballroom. Again, a great location for a banquet, but also capable of being divided into 3 meeting rooms with a lobby for those smaller meeting rooms. Very, very popular room. So at the end of 2015, that's where we were at. The Riverbank jigsaw starting to be completed, and our attention turned to the Stage 2 building, the original first purpose-built convention centre in Adelaide. So what we have now, and this is taken about 2 weeks ago, Stage 1, the central building, we call that the West Building, the central building, and Stage 2 now nearing completion. 3 distinct entities, but being capable of being used as one convention centre. Now, Stage 2, this little area here, is a very confined site. Again, built over railway lines, so we had to stick to the existing columns of the original building and work a design out from that point of view. But we also needed to have a raked auditorium, and we also needed to have flat floor ability. So what we produced is a building that really has not been repeated anywhere else in the world. It's not all new technology, but it's the first time it's all been put together. So this is the raked auditorium in cross-section, running right the way through down there. That has a capacity of 3,500 people. So go back to that statistic, that's probably 99% of all conferences worldwide can be held in there. That's the flat floor configuration. I'll just draw your attention to a couple of views here. I'll show you that view, I'll show you a view through there, and I'll show you one of what we call there the rotating drums. So literally in an hour over lunch, we can change this configuration to be totally different. We can pick up the seats and put them into the ceiling, which gives us a flat floor configuration right the way through and creates that extra exhibition space when we require it. We can divide the plenary hall in half, with half up and half down, to create a plenary hall for 1,000 people. And we can also rotate those drums over a tea time. They rotate 180 degrees, and they create 2 small theatrettes or breakout meeting rooms. This is it just in action. This is what we visualized and how it can be. So this is walking into the plenary hall at the ground level. sorry. It's a bit sensitive, this button. I'm sorry about that. Can we get this going again? No. That's why I brought him along, I'm afraid. Thanks very much, Lockie. This is the configuration where all the seating has been pulled up into the ceiling. Looking out with a view right through across the Adelaide Oval. So the seating being able to be lowered down, to be subdivided into the hall. That's the 3,500 configuration. There's the two rotating drums in the back. That's a foyer at the 7th floor level. So basically, that's where we're at. That's the concept to give us the breakout meeting rooms as well. The big advantage of that is literally over a tea time, we can go from a plenary of 3,500 and break it down into much smaller meeting rooms. So this picture was taken a week ago. That building is known as the Shark, the Shard, and a whole lot of other things. But basically, it's the new East building. And what we're intending to do is to create a cafe court under there, opening up onto the promenade. So from the Regattas restaurant right the way through to the bridge will be one entertainment area and eating zone and drinking zone for Adelaideans. This is the view under the seats when they're lifted up, looking out across the river. And this is one of the theatrettes, the rotating drums under construction. Again, this is just testing the rotation. I'll move on to the next slide. And that really is the base of one of those drums. With the foyer area, there'll be a bar, etc. out here, looking out over the water. And that's the view out over the water. So it will be Adelaide's best viewpoint. We believe those rotating drums in that particular area are going to be incredibly popular for a wide variety of uses. And that's looking in the other direction. What we're doing, this space down here was used for the cranes because the only way we could access the stage 2 was from the riverbank. There was no other way of accessing it, so all the huge girders and everything came down onto that space and then we'll cantilever it over onto the site. What we're about to start doing on that is reinstating that to a flattened lawned area where functions can take place, both public or our own. We've got power down there and kitchens to service that. And again, it's about bringing the public and enlivening the riverbank precinct and making the Adelaide Convention Centre not just a meeting place for delegates, but for Adelaideans. Now, people will say, well, has it been worth it? And with less than a year to go to opening, is the government reaping the rewards of its investment? And my answer would be absolutely yes. The interest countrywide in this convention centre and the interest in Adelaide as a result of what's happening here is just absolutely phenomenal. This is our book. Our official opening date is August the 30th next year. These are the 2 months for the entire centre, the bookings diary, for the 2 months after the opening. So the white is the vacant space at the moment, mainly weekends and odd rooms. But essentially the building is virtually 100% full. If you break that down, we've got over 400 events on our books now as we speak. We've got over 70 conferences of 1,000 delegates on our books. And those 70 conferences are the type of conferences that will fit into the individual buildings. So the concept of having the three entities, the three slightly smaller, boutique-y, more intimate venues, as opposed to, say, a Melbourne Convention Centre, for those of you who've been there, which is an incredible centre, but absolutely huge. These buildings are all being used. But on top of that, we've got 10 events on our books now, which occupy all three buildings simultaneously. And they are totally full. When I say all three buildings, every single square metre is being occupied. One we're working on at the moment is the next Land Forces Conference in 2018, and already we're struggling for space with the additional building in there. We've got the Australian Tourism Exchange coming in, the Asia Pacific Petroleum Congress and Exhibition, absolutely every square centimetre being occupied. So as a symbol for the future, I firmly believe that Adelaide Convention Centre, as a government tool for stimulating the new economies, the economic priorities that the government is trying to steer post-manufacturing, this centre has a huge role to play. And the government's recognising that. There's no two ways about that. We have a huge role to play. Of those 70 events of over 1,000, 95% represent the key economic strategies and priorities of the government. So that's what we were like literally 5 years ago. The original building, a void here which no one even really knew existed, and a promenade that wasn't complete, if you all recall, led to nowhere. And that's how we are right now as we speak, and a completed promenade, a link through to the new medical health precinct, which again is attracting worldwide attention. And I think the next stage of the jigsaw about to commence, which is the casino and Walker development in that space there. So a very, very exciting Riverbank precinct about to happen, and I have to say, a very, very exciting convention centre. Thank you very much.
I think you need to stay here, Alex. You might have a couple of questions, but come back, because I'm sure someone's going to ask a question. From a South Australian's point of view, I think that this has quietly gone along. It's not like the hospital, which is everything's being thrown around and a lot of flack flies. This has just quietly moved on, and it's got deadlines. It has to finish in time for the World Aeronautical Convention, which is how many people?
3,500.
3,500 people, and that is in September 2017. So this has to finish, and that is the commitment. That deadline has been there since the beginning, and it will be met. And this project will finish on time and on budget. And that's a fantastic achievement for the team, and Alex led that team from the concept stage right through, and there's no doubt it will finish on time and on budget, which is outstanding. So please, great talk, Alec, and I hope you've seen some of the vision that's going to be there, and it'll be exciting to go into. Has anybody got a question? Yes.
My question is related to the power issue that we had in September, and what is have you foreseen or planned the backup plan for your power supply in case we get hit by a similar event to what we got hit this September, next September?
Oh, it's an interesting question, that one, because in fact we had an event on as that cut hit, and we literally turned over to our backup generator supply within 30 seconds. I was able to go and see the client and inform them they can carry on as normal. The rest of the city is totally blacked out. And in fact, we actually hosted many intercontinental guests for the night in the convention centre. So look, you can't keep the centre going for 3 days and run a full conference. but we were able to keep the events that we had in-house going, and we have the backup generators to allow us to do it. I mean, it was incredible, really, that even with the 4 hours or whatever outage that we had, that phones started to go, and even your critical communication that we were all working on was starting to die out. So it did teach us a couple of things, that we need another little generator for our security branch, for instance, just so they can keep their phones powered up. But no, it all worked well.
Tom.
Thanks for a great talk. It's a great. It's a great bonus for South Australia, and I congratulate you and the team.
Here it is, Tom.
I missed it, but I really would like to know the overall current cost.
The current cost is just under 400 million. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks very much. Congratulations. John Tomczyk from Blitz Marketing. Just a question. I'd be interested to know what percentage is from domestic conventions compared to international, with the introduction of Qatar Airways, Emirates, and also now China Southern coming up. Is that changing the balance at all?
Look, international flights are incredibly important. We've just lost a bid that we thought we were going to win, an Asian bid to the Gold Coast, because their Asian connections were better than ours, and I thought ours were pretty damn good now. So we still lose events because of our lack of, if you like, international connections, but certainly it's improved hugely, and in many respects, if we're careful with our marketing, we can promote Adelaide as probably the most central of all the Australian cities. It's probably the only city that you can actually go to another centre and back again in a day, all around Australia. So we try and use that tact a bit. As far as the percentage goes, about 15% of our revenue is derived from international business, and having sat on some panels around the country, that seems to be just about the kind of standard. So really, the national business is our core business, but obviously international is terribly important. We are specifically trying to target Asia more, because generally conferences are becoming more regional. Those huge world congresses are now becoming regional with slightly lesser numbers, but being held more often. And we're about to get representation in Singapore, because our key market is really association, and Singapore is probably the most mature of all the Asian cities as far as association business goes.
Alec, thank you. As Geoff mentioned, a number of us had the privilege of hearing you some time ago talk about your vision, and I drove down across the bridge on Saturday and looked across from that wonderful building that our late member John Morfitt designed, the Festival Centre, and I looked across and I saw your vision, and I thought, what a wonderful asset it is to this state. All power to you, well done. What you showed us a few years ago on PowerPoints has actually come to fruition, as Geoff said, on time and on budget. I had the pleasure of running a conference September, about a week after it opened, the West Wing, and it was a spectacular event in a very new venue. So a bouquet. My only question, as a rather selfish driver who goes across the Morford Bridge every morning, why the hell did you take away our third lane?
Well, I didn't, but actually I was very surprised that actually happened. Having said that, operationally, it's quite important from a coach drop-off point of view, from people with disabilities point of view, and from a VIP point of view. But I acknowledge it, and all those people driving across the bridge, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Peter, you realise that there's a board member there called me who asked us the very same question. Alec, I think one of the things that I have the privilege, obviously, of being a board member and therefore get to see things, but And Alec I've known for many years, and I've done events with him and all sorts of things. But one of the things that is really exciting, and we're hoping we may be able to work together as a club to do something with the convention centre, of opening up an evening where there's a bit of a tour behind the scenes, because the actual enormity of this size is what's so hard to convey until you're actually behind the scenes. Often you get to see what's in the front of house, but when you go behind, I don't know how Alec actually finds his way around, to be honest, and all the different kitchens and all the different areas, the staging areas, etc. So we're thinking that sometime mid next year we would probably be able to do something with the club as a bit of a fundraiser or something, so that you get to see some of the opportunities that are there, and some of the. And often if there's not a lot of event happening and you get to see the vision, I've had the privilege of being on that latest section, the east section, with the pouring wind and rain howling through the gaps before it was actually totally sealed, and the vision from that top level is fantastic. So great opportunity. Alec, it's a great credit to you that you had the vision, you drove it, you're still driving it, and it will get there. And thank you very much on behalf of everybody. Please show your appreciation.